and how they help to inform and to shape what I call homeland politics. And this is a special time in their lives. This is the time where they really need to get the best education. What would life be like for me if one day, for whatever reason, I can no longer live in my home country? 1 year, 2 years, they will find a way.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Senang sekali bisa berjumpa di sore hari ini di podcast sore. We are very grateful because with us here we have Professor Anissa Misbah. Professor, good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon.
Thank you so much. So maybe you can introduce yourself. If you're looking at the refugee issues, your name is so famous. So many articles has been produced, and so many inspiration coming from you. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about why you are very interested in studying forced migration issue, especially in Indonesia context.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I've been coming to Indonesia for many years. I think even in the 1990s, I already come to Indonesia, but back then I was still a student. But it was a very important experience for myself to live in a different country. I'm not really as a migrant. It was just like a program Pertukaran Belajar, exchange student. But like having the possibility to live in a different country was very interesting for me. So I was probably always kind of interested in migration issues. But then when I started university back in Germany, I also became very interested in like conflicts and transition. And we're talking here about the 1990s, the late 1990s, when there was so much happening in Indonesia. Indonesia really became a focus because people wanted to understand what's happening here. And there was of course reformasi, and there was also conflict and violence. And we know that whenever there is conflict and violence, sometimes people are no longer safe in where they live, and they have to go. So in a way, my personal story is very much connected to Indonesia, and I got to know people who, for example, had to leave from Indonesia, and back then who came to Germany. People from Papua, people from Aceh, people from Timor-Leste, but also like Indonesian students, and they would tell us what's happening. And for me, these people who left Indonesia, some of them just briefly, were a very important source of information. And when I kept studying, I was looking for an interesting topic, what could I study, and I decided I want to study refugees from Indonesia. So I started to look at people from Aceh. And some of them were living in Europe, some in Scandinavia, but most of them of course were living in Malaysia at the time. So I wanted to know, like, how can people who leave their homeland still have an influence on the country they left behind? So I became very interested following around Achenese people in Malaysia, and I also went to Scandinavia and to America and to Australia, and it was basically all about the Achenese diaspora, and how they help to inform and to shape what I called homeland politics. But that project eventually came to an end, and I was looking for, what's next? And that was around 2009, 2010. And this was a time when Indonesia was very peaceful, so there was not so much of a reason for people to leave Indonesia. But what we could see at this point of time, because Indonesia was peaceful, it suddenly became an interesting point of transition for people who were fleeing from other conflicts in the world, people from the Middle East, people from Afghanistan. They suddenly started coming to Indonesia, and for me this was of course a very interesting topic, because nobody had really written so much about it, maybe about people who came in the 70s and 80s, like the Vietnamese boat people, but like the new refugees, in the 2010s. not so much yet, and well, that was good for me. But I also noticed when I started my research in Indonesia, there were not many colleagues that I could exchange, with. When we make a seminar, usually only 3 or 4 people who come and attend, so it was not a very popular topic. But I think it has really changed in the last 15 years. So like there's now much more interest from, students, but also from scholars and academics who want to study all kinds of refugee-related issues. But so that's an interesting journey to see how topics, become suddenly a matter of public interest.
Okay. Professor Antia, can you please, tell us more about your background? As I know that you are all anthropologists, and also, but you also have conducted, research in many countries, and also your study also before from your PhD in Melbourne, etc. And maybe you can have a say about it.
It's often difficult to say what is my real discipline because I started with anthropology, and then I did a little bit with area studies, Southeast Asian studies, and the PhD was in political science.
Oh.
But then my postdoc, my first postdoc was actually at a law school. So it's very mixed background, but I have always enjoyed that because you get to know a lot of different colleagues and a lot of different academic approaches of looking at some specific subject matter. And specifically when it comes to studying refugee movements, it's not enough to just only look from one discipline, because I think legal studies are extremely important because these people can explain to us the normative frameworks and what ought to be. But then it's also very good to work with anthropologists who do the kind of microscopic studying on the ground, collecting empirical data to see what ought to be is not necessarily what is happening on the ground. But then it's also interesting to talk to people who come from international relations. So I'm trying to if I write something, ideally I try to appeal to a larger audience. So that's to get as many people as possible interested in the topic. So
because you focus on the refugee issue. It's in nature is a very interdisciplinary kind of
very much
studies from so different background. And from your experience in doing the research in Indonesia, what do you think? You can maybe highlight, because maybe our audience, many of them maybe don't know about the refugee issues, and maybe you can have a say about the refugees and how they live in Indonesia and around that maybe.
Yeah, that's. It's not an easy question because the circumstances, they have changed substantially. So I started looking at refugees in Indonesia in 2010, and at that time people came to Indonesia, but they didn't stay very long because this was the time when there were still boats going to Australia. So some of them would register, but most people would come, stay briefly, and try to leave as quick as possible. But this has changed because Australia has changed its policies for refugees who arrive by boat. And now what we can see is that many refugees, they stay in Indonesia for many years, and we're talking 10 years, 12 years, 15 years. So the idea of using Indonesia as a stepping stone to reach a country in the global north, that's not really working out. It's working out for some who are lucky enough to join the international resettlement programs, but many people ended up in Indonesia and they spent their entire youth, and often, or most of the people who come to Indonesia, they're fairly young, and this is a special time in their lives. This is the time where they really need to get the best education possible, but this is also the time, when they want to start a family, when they want to have a career. But unfortunately, for many people who end up staying in Indonesia much longer than they thought.
So how long is that? What are the longest?
The longest is hard to say. some people that I know have definitely been here for 15 years.
Wow, 15 years.
It's really long. But it means like for them, maybe we can say like the normal life circle is a little bit interrupted. They will have to postpone certain events. For example, there's a lot of people who have started their education, let's say in Afghanistan or Iran, and they're very smart, you know, like maybe they managed to finish, you know, class 10, but they can't finish high school, and if they can't get a high school diploma, it will be very difficult for them to, for example, then attend university. So this is a problem, like that this transit can sometimes become a bit of an empty time, because people spend a lot of time waiting, also adjusting themselves to the conditions here, but preferably they would just like prefer to continue with their lives, you know, like to get on, to set up a new life in a place which is safe and secure for them. And on the one hand, we can say Indonesia is safe, you know, there's no war. But refugees, of course, they face a number of problems. They don't have the same rights as Indonesian citizens for many reasons. This is the case. But when we imagine, you know, and I think it's always really important to have a bit of empathy, to imagine what would life be like for me if one day, for whatever reason, I can no longer live in my home country, you know, like, you know, what would be my priorities? Like, what would I prepare to do to reach another place? You know, so I think it's often important. So sometimes, you know, we hear that refugees, they ask for a lot, they make a lot of demands, but then if we were in their situation, well, most likely we would make the same requests or the same demands.
So, you know, many people live their own countries, but what are the differences between the refugees and any other, you know, sort of foreigners who live in other countries? For example, migrants, economic migrants, etc. What are the difference between them?
I mean, economic migrants, I mean, depending on how you migrate, you would, if you're a regular economic migrant and you have very specific rights and entitlements, you know, like you're protected, for example, if you work in a job, there are laws that will protect you so that you would not be exploited. And if somebody, for example, doesn't want to pay your salary, you have, you know, legal pathways in order to make a complaint, to get a compensation, to maybe even, you know, sue your employer. Well, the thing with refugees is in many countries they're not actually allowed to work, and that creates a huge problem for them, because if you're not allowed to work, if you're not able to earn your own money, you have to rely on others. You can either rely on your family, but depending on whether they can keep supporting you, that might not be an option for many. You know, like we talked about that some people have stayed here for 10 years, and people who are fleeing from countries of conflict, they don't have so much savings. You know, at some point they will have sold all their assets, they will have sold all their land, so they can't send more money here to support their family members.
How can they live here? I mean, like, as you said, that there's no like kind of legal kind of you know, instruments that protect them, and how they can still, you know, be here,
survive. I mean, in Indonesia we know that there are some organizations who would provide like a tiny little bit of like a stipend, which is probably enough to, you know, pay and cover the basics, but not much more than that. Like from the IOM, they roughly provide a bit over 1 million, and we know like the minimum salary in Indonesia is a lot higher. Like this amount of money that
4 million.
4 million, yeah. Like, I mean, some of the organizations who are supporting refugees financially in Indonesia, they haven't really, you know, increase the amount of money, so they have not taken into consideration inflation and the rise of like living costs. So there is a little bit of financial support, but it's definitely not enough. So people, in a way, they are forced to sometimes make money. And the thing is, if you don't have the right to work and you still work, that of course means that you are operating a legal gray zone, and it makes you very vulnerable because you can be arrested and then detained, but also you can be cheated upon, you know. For example, if you don't have legal documentation in Indonesia, you can't open a bank account.
Yeah.
So you might have to ask a friend whether you can use his or her bank account, but there is no guarantee that the money that has been sent to this bank account, you know, will actually be passed on to you. So that means that people are in a very vulnerable situation, and sometimes we see that people are also tempted to do, you know, criminal things, not because they are particularly interested, you know, in doing criminal things, but
they don't have any choice.
It's a lack of legal choices. So that I think is particularly becoming a problem for these refugees who end up staying and waiting for a long period of time. You know, 1 year, 2 years, they will find a way. Maybe they can borrow some money, maybe some friends can still support them. You know, there's a lot of solidarity amongst refugees. But you know, when it's 5 years or 10 years, they're just really depleted of any resources.
Is there any other way out? I mean, like, for example, maybe there's no other state that may host them, or they come back to their own countries, or any other kind of solution?
It really depends. It really depends. I mean, so most of the refugees in Indonesia, they're from Afghanistan. And you know, officially, there's now peace in Afghanistan, but we have to wonder, like, what kind of a peace is it in Afghanistan? Like, who is forming the government? Like, do people in Afghanistan enjoy freedom? What's the situation for women there, women and girls? You know, like, I mean, you know, they aren't allowed to go to school, so. Theoretically, you could go back to Afghanistan, but I mean, imagine you have daughters. Would you take them back to Afghanistan now? Would you trust the Taliban? Well, probably not. So, and then the next large group of refugees who comes to Indonesia are people from Rohingya, people from Myanmar, and I mean, there is so much fighting happening in Rakhine. The majority of Rohingya people have fled to Bangladesh, and they're living in refugee camps since 2017. They're not allowed to live in proper houses, they live in tents. So whenever there is like the musim hujan or the monsoon, you know, the whole place becomes a swamp. So you face a lot of difficulties. And again, they're not allowed to work. And that's why we see a massive increase, for example, in sex work. Like people they're so desperate that they would opt for these options, not because they want. On top of this, it's a very, in some refugee camps, particularly in Bangladesh, it's really difficult and very dangerous to live. There's shootings, there's violence, there's forced recruitments for young men to go back to Myanmar and fight for the rebel groups or for whomever. So, I mean, they know it's very dangerous to come to Indonesia because they travel by boat. But they're so afraid about all these different risks that they face in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, that they would still try to reach Indonesia, because at least it's safe. You know, there's no conflict happening here. Like, life will not be perfect, and I think they know that, but it's still better than trying to stay on. They have been sitting and waiting basically for 8 years. So
8 years.
In owning Cox's Bazar, so like, how much longer can you ask them to sit and wait? So, I mean, in the beginning, well, maybe some people were still hoping that eventually there will be some kind of voluntary repatriation, but with the current system in Myanmar, with the coup that happened in 2021, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to be optimistic. And
so what about, you know, other countries that may host them?
Well, I mean, of course, Indonesia I mean, we could say in some regard Indonesia is lucky because like compared to the neighboring countries, there are actually not that many refugees and asylum seekers in Indonesia. Like compared to the huge population of Indonesia, the number of refugees coming here is small. In Malaysia, we have more than 200,000.
Yeah.
But I suspect the number is probably quite a bit larger because registration can be a little bit slow. Thailand, also we're talking, several hundred thousands.
What about Indonesia?
Indonesia, what do you have? At the moment, it's less than 12,000. So, I mean, 12,000 in Indonesia, 200,000 in Malaysia, that's quite a difference. Also, if we look at the total number of population in Indonesia and in Malaysia. Now, the situation in these two other countries is slightly different. Like in Malaysia, there is more work opportunities. Maybe not necessarily in a legal way, although there are now considerations to grant work rights for some particular jobs to refugees in Malaysia. We will see whether this is going to happen or not. But there are still, many, we could say like peluang. Opportunities for people to find some kind of informal work, which here in Indonesia would be very difficult because we know that Indonesia, by the end of the day, is a labor sending country, whereas Malaysia is actually importing a lot of like mostly lowly skilled or unskilled labor, people who work in the farms, constructions, factories,
household.
Yes, of course, yes, also true. And I think also in Thailand we have very recently seen a change that they understand that if we prevent refugees from working, it's not good for the refugees, but it's actually also not good for the country because they will work one way or another. But if they work informally, we can't even earn taxes. So by granting work rights, we could also say there is a way for the state to get some revenues through tax payments. So rather than having people who become like a highly vulnerable and highly dependent community who like basically depend on charity or welfare or whatever kind of like subsidies, by using the skills, by allowing them to unfold their capabilities, it's actually also a contribution. So that could eventually also create maybe more openness towards refugees because they're not coming here to beg, minta or depend on scarce resources, but they can also contribute and contribute through taxes. That's usually how it works in other countries. Not all the countries give work rights immediately. Sometimes it takes a little while to see whether people are actually acknowledged as refugees or not. Sometimes they only open certain sectors, where there's maybe a shortage. But I guess that could be maybe a way forward, also to decrease the kecemburuan sosial, because of course we have to acknowledge by the end of the day that there is poverty in Indonesia and that the number of people who work, for example, in the informal economy in Indonesia is very high. So that there could be competition in those sectors.
I mean, for example, maybe you also noticed that only 1% refugee resettle to the developed countries. So as far as I noticed that the only kind of realistic solution is like keep the refugee stay here, but in a condition maybe like let them have their own right, the fundamental rights, etc. And some people say like that. What about you? What about your kind of perspective about it? Do you keen to let the refugee here? But because as you said that it's not really kind of realistic to send them home because the conditions, and also like to send any other countries which are also unrealistic.
It's difficult. Yeah.
Is it a choice?
I mean, if we only talk about the norms and the legal framework, like local integration could be an option. I mean, for those who want, and I think what is really important that decisions are not just made for refugees, but that there's a way to integrate them in the decision-making process, because rarely do we have one solution that is good for all. I think it requires very specific and individual solutions for those people who have family members living, I don't know, in Canada, in the US, in Australia. They probably can find a way to resettle, not through the official resettlement quotas, but there's also family reunification, and there could also be following the spouse's marriage, so on and so on. And also, I mean, there are people that are highly skilled, and in some countries they might not resettle them as refugees, but they might give them some kind of work visa. So, and it's, I think, a very interesting, very interesting new opportunities that are arising, some kind of like silver line at the horizon that instead of just hoping at the
three solutions.
Exactly, just hoping for like the small number of resettlement that has been increasing for the last couple of years, and we know Trump has basically completely slashed the intake for refugees. I think it's probably good to also to look for alternative forms of resettlement or onward migration through education, through family reunification, through labor mobility. That is important, but it's not going to work for all of them, again, as I said. And I'm sometimes really surprised, because I have met refugees, they could have gone to Canada and they didn't want to go because they prefer to stay in the region. I mean, for there, the priority was, first of all, to live in a Muslim country. That was very important for them. They didn't want to be in a country where, Muslims are not always, fully respected, or there's a lot of like prejudice or discrimination happening. But also they kind of wanted to stay like in Southeast Asia, because who knows, at some point they can go back, and then they are close enough. So that is for some people also a consideration, particularly if most of their, extended family still lives in this part of the world. So it really depends. Like, of course, some people have these dreams. I want to go to the Negara Maju, like the developed country, and then I will become a doctor or a lawyer or this and that. But when we have like a more serious conversation with people, they usually, also tell us a bit more about plan B or C, which tends to be maybe a bit more realistic.
One last question. I mean, at least for those who want to stay in Indonesia, what do you suggest for, our governments, or, maybe civil society in general, for example?
That's a difficult question, and I mean, as a foreigner, of course, it's very difficult to make recommendations because this is Indonesia. This is. I think for Indonesia to find out, but I guess it probably could be good to come to conclusion that refugees, it's not going to be a temporary phenomena, but I think there have always been refugees, and there always will be refugees for very different reasons. I mean, maybe the number of people from Afghanistan might decrease, but then a conflict somewhere else could arise, and Indonesia is a good country, so I think this is important to realize, like, there's always going to be some movement which is very difficult to predict. So when the government is thinking about refugees, it's not so much about like trying to finish the matter, but rather to just expect there might always be some people coming, and it's better to have like procedures in place, to, if they come, well, they are prepared, like it's not going to be a big surprise, and what are we going to do next? So, but like to have like some kinds of like basic understanding, like how will we treat refugees? What are their rights? What are they allowed to do? Like to have some kind of clear standards in place. I guess that could probably help because then the decision making is not so much ad hoc, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. So that maybe just is.
Okay, maybe some words closing statement.
Okay, good. I think I very much enjoy working with you and also the other Indonesian colleagues. I always learn a lot from you, and I think we still have a lot of work ahead, like things we can, work on together, both in terms of research, but also teaching. There's many ways to, provide some advocacy, or to advocate on this issue. And I look very much forward to working with you and students and other Indonesian academics.
Thank you so much, Professor Ance Misbah from Bielefeld University. It's an honor for us to invite you here. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, audiences, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you. Bye.